Hello everyone, thanks for joining us after lunch. Welcome to our Safer Spaces panel. Today we're going to be reflecting on the campaign that we launched in May earlier this year and looking at its impact, its reach, next steps, and talking about safer spaces and sexual assault in a bit more of a wider and broader context. But to start, I'd just like all of our lovely panelists to introduce themselves and perhaps just say how you were involved in the campaign or supported it or participated.
Okay, my name is Tracey Wise. I founded Safe Gigs Women 2 years ago after I was sexually assaulted at a big outdoor event in June. We supported Safer Spaces this year because for us it fitted the ethos of what we were trying to do. We were trying to say that gigs, venues, bands, promoters should be looking at sexual assault in a proactive way, and this campaign was very much proactive, so that was why we supported it and shared it as much as we could.
Hi, I'm Kate. I wrote a feature for Broadly, which is Vice's feminist channel, about 2 years ago about the problem of sexual violence and sexual harassment at music festivals and how no one really seemed to be talking about it. I followed the story since then, both in the UK and internationally, and then was delighted this year to hear about the Safer Spaces campaign. It sounded like such a huge step forward, and it was so exciting for me to cover its launch as a story and go back to the people who maybe hadn't spoken to me the first time or would be too scared to speak to me from festivals and chat to them about how they were getting involved to help solve the problem.
Hi, My name is Rebecca Hitchen. I'm the Operations Coordinator at Rape Crisis South London, and I'm also a trustee of Rape Crisis England and Wales. We know that sexual violence happens anywhere and everywhere, and that it also carries a really huge stigma. So any campaigns which are working to improve the experiences of women and girls and breaking down that stigma, we're really interested to be involved in.
Hi, I'm Amy. I'm the General Manager of the Standon Calling Festival, and we participated in the campaign last year and loads and loads of other festivals by taking part in the website and social media blackout, and also putting materials advertising the campaign on the site on the web this year.
Excellent. So, according to Rape Crisis, some stats provided by Rebecca, more than 500,000 adults are sexually assaulted in the UK every year, but only 15% of those people choose to report it to the police. Now, that's a really scary stat to start with. Why do you think people don't report these things?
Why would they, would be my question. There are so many barriers to speaking out about sexual violence, and most of which tie to the fact that women and girls generally aren't believed. We live in a society which is victim shaming and victim blaming, and women and girls know that. We exist in this society, so if you are going to speak out and you have that bravery and courage, you know that you might not be met with support and with belief. We also know the huge rate of attrition so of those 15% of people that do speak out and report to the police, there is then this massive attrition again to a 7% rate of guilty convictions at court. So when you know that, and you also know the other potential ramifications in your own sort of personal life and social environment, then it becomes a very difficult decision to make.
So some of the key messages that we had in our campaign, I should have probably started with some of this, were around not being a bystander, hands off unless consent. And one of the things in our charter of best practice was to take a victim-led approach. Now, how do you think festivals should be reacting to someone who says they've been sexually assaulted at their event if they say something, or how do you think they should be trying to prevent it from even happening in the first place? It's a bit of a loaded question.
Sorry. In terms of prevention, we would like to see that festivals are using things like social media, websites, programs, every tool in their disposal to start having a conversation before their event even starts, to say, we will not tolerate sexual assault, sexual harassment at our event. If you are found to be a perpetrator of this kind of behaviour, we will throw you out just as we would if you were caught committing violence, if you were caught thieving, any other sort of disturbance, it should be taken that same way. Boomtown this year did fantastic. They had a paragraph in their programme explaining exactly why we were there with them and what they would expect from their festival goers with their behaviour as well. So there's much that can be done before an event even starts to start setting that idea that it is not an excuse to come to a festival and act in that way.
Sorry, do you think then that festival organisers should be immediately evicting people if they are accused of sexual assault? And then if they are evicted, they are then blacklisted from the event?
Blacklisting is an interesting... At Sacred Women, we believe that people can be... The conversation should be about prevention. We can have a discussion that says, actually, your behaviour is not appropriate. And if someone hasn't ever been made that aware before, because one of the things that we strongly support is the idea that consent isn't very well taught in this country, the idea of emphatic consent even less so. So if we start having that sort of training and teaching, and even around festivals, you know, build that into your events. Most festivals have a discussion area, they have healthcare services on board. Why can't consent be part of that? If you're encouraging that behaviour and yet still someone is not willing to stand by that, then maybe yes, blacklisting could be an idea.
Could I just, I totally, definitely hear what you say there, but I think there is something dangerous about saying, oh, these men, because it is men and boys who, disproportionately commit acts of sexual violence. If we say, oh, they don't know, because they don't know what consent is and they don't know what consent looks like, I think that there is a danger there of giving perpetrators a real get out and because they can be like, oh, I don't know, I wasn't taught. And it also is unfair to the, vast number of men who don't commit acts of sexual violence. And I think we really need to recognise that the way that we socially interact with others, when someone's consenting or not, you can tell from body language. You can't, and I think by saying that if men don't know whether someone's consenting or not, it is putting maybe the onus back on the women and girls.
So I'd say that consent is one part of a bigger strategy in a festival's approach to how they deal with this as well.
Amy, if someone were to disclose sexual assault at Standon Calling, what would the process be at your event?
So I suppose it would really depend on how we heard about it and how they came to us. Most of the time it would either be via a member of security, and then they would radio through to our event control, and the person who was, so the victim would probably be taken back to our event control area and speak to a member of our staff there, who would then deal with it in an appropriate manner. They might also go into our welfare tent and they would be dealt with in that space. They could also be taken into our with our medics as well. But they would be spoken to and kind of dealt with appropriately. We would ask them if they would want to then escalate it to the police. If they do want to escalate it to the police, we would then work in tandem with them about how they wanted to proceed. But we would hope that if they want to make it a criminal case, that we would try and find them and pass them over to the police as quickly as possible. And in that case, they probably would be evicted from our site and not be readmitted, as we wouldn't, like anybody who is undergoing any criminal investigation, we wouldn't want them being roaming free in our festival site. It's not so much of a grey area. It does become more of a grey area if we have had a case in the past where somebody was verbally harassed and then didn't want to make it a police matter, which is more difficult. But in that case, it was more clear-cut because the person who was doing it had broken into our festival site. So we also had a kind of very clear, easy way just to evict them. I'm not sure exactly how it would go if somebody said they didn't want to make it a criminal matter, but we couldn't find, if they didn't want to identify that person or find them, it would be difficult for us, and in that case we would just focus on making that person safe and comfortable, and if they weren't happy at the event anymore, we would try and get them home.
I think that's a great answer. So compared to reports from last season, 2017 seemed to have a relatively low amount of reported sexual assaults. Do we think this is because people are still not reporting it, or because more people are speaking out about it and sexual assault has decreased at festivals?
I don't think it's decreased.
I just wanted to trigger you.
No, we see sexual violence rates, both incidences and reports to the police, that they are increasing year on year. And so I think the fact that there aren't any reported rapes to the festival organisers or to the police in no way means that there aren't rapes and sexual assaults taking place at your festivals. I can tell you that they are, absolutely. And I think it would be easy to say, oh, there's no reported ones, we don't have an issue here, but I think part of this campaign and why it's been so valuable is festivals actually saying, like, okay, we're going to be proactive. Even though there have been no reports, we're going to do what we can to try and prevent it happening and try and let survivors know that if there is an incident, then we know how to respond appropriately. But yeah, it's definitely, I mean, if anything, it's increasing.
The reports that we've had from people emailing us would suggest that it's the same as it ever was. But there was also 2 high-profile cases this year which weren't rapes, but they came under sexual assault. One from an event in London where a security staff member had assaulted a member of the crowd. And there was another one at another event in London, actually, where it's now going, well, there's now greater discussion about the idea of upskirting photos because that had happened at a festival as well. And I don't know if maybe those 2 cases have sort of refocused it without being, I don't want to downgrade the woman's experience, please tell me if my language is wrong. Those were, we can talk about those, they're not as awful as the worst ever case scenario can be, so we'll talk about those, but we won't necessarily focus on something else. Although, for the women involved, that is still a traumatic experience. But it also shows that, for me, the one where it was a member of security who had assaulted a member of the crowd, how much we need the whole of a festival to get on board, because festivals are complex things. You've got so many outside agencies coming in, and that's why this has got to be an all year round campaign, that you're talking to the bodies that you bring in to help you with your festivals as well.
I think that one interesting thing about the case of upskirting, so that's when a man in the crowd at a London festival was trying to he was trying to approach a woman. She dismissed him, then he started taking pictures up her skirt. And her reaction was she wanted to press charges and then realised that upskirting isn't actually illegal. I think one of the really great things about how the Safer Spaces campaign is, it's really great to be proactive and do more than the law asks, because I think that specific example really proves that the law doesn't support women enough at all. And I always think of festivals as massively forward-thinking, so it's a real area where we can be super forward-thinking.
Way to work the crowd as well.
So every year we do an annual audience survey, and this year we've added a couple of new questions. One of them being, have you ever experienced sexual assault at a festival? Because I don't think the question has ever directly been asked to festival goers. Now the results for that won't be ready until the end of January for this summer, but at the moment we've had 1,400 responses, and so far 41 people have said yes. Now I was expecting that to be higher, but you also have to take into account that people still don't want to report these things, and they might not think it's anonymous. Reasons for not reporting it include them not knowing who to report it to, brushing it off as something that was not a big deal, it would be too hard to find the culprit, and the report wouldn't be taken seriously. So how do you think festivals can change that mentality and get more people to report these things as they're happening, Because I think there's also an issue with people reporting things on social media when they get home rather than at the event as well. So how do we change that, and what can festivals be doing to support victims so that they feel safe and can report these things straight away?
I think it's really difficult for festivals to sort of, and to encourage people to speak out, because it's a negative thing to speak about when most of how we're communicating is to try and sell tickets. And that's why I think we found that the campaign so appealing, because it was a way that explained it very clearly, that was a positive and proactive message that basically said that quite clearly, that if you see or experience sexual assault or harassment at our festival, you need to speak to a member of security or somebody else involved with the festival, and we will take you seriously. Because that, I think, probably would have always happened at the festival anyway, but it's a difficult thing to broach, and it's a difficult thing especially to broach in advance of the festival, because it's quite a negative message, and people will sit up and say, why are you talking about this? Is this something that happens a lot at your festival? And they will read the negative message in it. And that's why having a campaign like this was really positive and really well received, and something that we could then take that message and reiterate it in our programme and other materials, and say, if you feel uncomfortable, this is what you need to do. Because I think lots of people wouldn't necessarily know to go up to a security guard, and they wouldn't feel that they would listen to them, because they're normally sort of quite large, scary-looking men, and it wouldn't be easy to do. So, and I don't know, maybe we do need to think about whether we need to do more in terms of providing points of customer service that people know that they can go, and that there's a friendly face that's more visible than security roaming around the site.
Do you think that security companies should be involved in the campaign as well? And do you brief your security company about sexual assault?
Yeah, I mean, we talk to them, and it is something that our security company work at a lot of festivals, and it is something that our head of security is something that they will tell their staff to take it seriously, but not to deal with it themselves when they see it. But managing security is a difficult thing to do as well, and it's difficult to sort of manage that they're dealing with all sorts of things in the way that you want them to. So it would be good to work closer with them, definitely, and for them to be educated. But yeah, it's difficult to know where to get that resource as well, I think.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, rape crisis will provide training.
There's training tomorrow.
Sorry, like that. There's training tomorrow. And I know, Tracey, you do a lot of training as well. But I think the point I'd like to make is that to effect change and to implement a strategy, so to implement zero tolerance, improve bystander interventions, it needs resources like anything would. So I think signing up to a campaign and being signatory to a charter is fantastic, and it's such a massive step. I don't underestimate that at all. But I think there is then a need to go a step further and be reviewing policies and be thinking about, okay, in the situation where someone spoke out that they didn't want to report it to the police, what would those next steps be in relation to the perp? Would we have a policy where we would just kick them out? So just really reviewing and thinking about things from the survivor's experience, and increased training. Again, that costs money, but it's really worth it because it improves people's experiences and can work towards prevention and preventing any incidents occurring.
Yeah, I think literally talking to women who come to the festivals and asking them what would make them feel safer and what would make it easier for them to report. Is it training all the staff, not just security, and of how to deal with someone coming and reporting something to them, and letting festival goers know that they could report it to all of those people, whether it's someone like a steward or like just another member of staff. And also I think just thinking practically, like if your festival's really big, like is it going to take someone walking like the whole length of the festival to report something? Is it going to be like 4 in the morning and they're like a bit mashed and are scared to come and report something in case like they get in trouble for like taking drugs. I think thinking about like all those little practical things that might be making people afraid rather than worrying about it.
The point I would say about festivals worrying that it sends in a negative message is, for us, the Blackout campaign was fantastic this year. It was, a day of coverage, and it was like, oh wow, all these festivals are talking about this, that's great. And is that not a better message than getting to the end of your event and 2 days later the local news are covering that this has happened? Because there are things that we're saying between us that you can do to try and prevent that in the first place. So getting involved in campaigns like this, supporting campaigns local to you or us or Rape Crisis to say we do take this seriously, has got to be a better message than getting to the negative press that you could face at the end of your event if something goes wrong.
Yeah, I think from my experience, when I wrote about sexual assaults at festivals for the first time, and I felt like people were scared that by talking about it, it would make it sound like there were loads and loads of incidents at their event, and there maybe weren't. When that article went out, the reaction to it was huge, and it was loads and loads of people saying that they wanted to feel safe at events, that actually by standing up and saying, these are all the things we won't accept here, listing them out clearly, everything from like groping to rape, and then also being like, and this is what we're doing to protect people who come, it actually like makes an event more appealing rather than less appealing. And I know as a festival goer myself that it makes it much more appealing.
Do we think that reporting processes are too intimidating/lengthy?
I think it would be good to have a way to report stuff like groping really quickly, and have it logged. I think part of the issue with the lack of data around sexual violence and harassment events is that stuff like groping, someone putting their hand up your skirt, someone shouting something sexually aggressive at you, those things often don't get reported because reporting them is kind of makes it more hassle for the victim. And you just kind of want to get on and have a good time. And also you probably don't want to turn that into, you might not want to turn that into like a police issue. So having a way where someone could log those on the app or to just a member of staff where it would actually get logged and reported and would be available in a report later would be really useful.
I think so as well. There's a festival in Australia called Laneway, and this year, for the first time, they trialled, it was kind of like a safety hotline number. So you could dial 1-800-LANEWAY if you were feeling threatened, if you saw disrespectful behaviour, all sorts of things. So you didn't necessarily have to report a crime. You could just report that someone was making you feel uncomfortable. Do we think something like that would work at UK events, or something similar where you could have perhaps some sort of uncomfortable panic button on an app, on a festival app? I don't know, I'm making that up now, but
I think that's an interesting idea. There was a big campaign in London recently about harassment and groping on the tube, and there was a number that you could text. So maybe sometimes you feel that you don't necessarily want to get the police involved, but if you had like a 5-digit number that you could text for the festival and say, this happened at this part of the festival, at least that way we've got statistics to show what's going on, and also that way you might be able to redirect your resources to say, okay, well, 3 people have reported something going on down there, maybe we need to get someone to go and have a look. And that way you're covering the festival site as well, gives you information about what might be happening where.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's very good. I think Project Guardian, the TFL one in London, does work well and has had really wide-ranging responses, but it does come down to resourcing as well. So if there's a helpline, it would be for the festivals to staff that and manage that, and I think, so it's just always, just because we're working for a charity where resourcing and funding is always an issue. I do know that when you're asking people to do additional things that need money to do them, it can be a difficult question, but it's worth doing.
So with the Safer Spaces campaign in May, we did initially have some trepidation from some festivals about participating, just because they were worried about the messaging. We did have to get the messaging right and things like that. Do you think that sexual assault and harassment is more of an issue at certain types of festivals with a certain demographic?
I
I think what you said was okay if you don't name festivals.
Okay. I know that there are certain festivals, and I'm really trying to put this diplomatically, where we know there are issues. I'm not going to say that it's a type of music or a type of... no, that's wrong. Let's start again. There's not a type of music necessarily, because that's one question that we get asked a lot, is that are certain events, so say if they're metal festivals or if they're more dance-based, do we have great reports from that? And I would say no, they're pretty much the same throughout, but I know there are events where we would definitely have concerns. Having been to one of those events myself, I would definitely say, yeah, there's things that need to be talked about with that festival. How you get them to listen to us or actually start to engage in that process, I don't know. But I guess it is the fear that they're maybe set in the negative story that you were saying that before the festival's even started. But again, I would say to them, is it better to have a proactive stance that, look, we are listening to your concerns and we are going to try and tackle this, rather than get to the end of festival season and then have to start with the bad news.
Also, I'd say the proactive stance would put off people who were going to come and do stuff.
There was a load of issues at a festival in Sweden, Bravalla Festival, this summer, and off the back of that, they've now decided to have a female-only festival next year. What do we think of that? Do we think that's going to fix the problem? Is it just a very strong statement? I'd like to get all of your thoughts on that.
It's a statement. I don't understand why for the second year, because Bravalla had so many issues last year as well. So, we're still, the second year that this has happened. I'm not entirely sure how workable it is in terms of, we still know that there are certain areas of music and entertainment sectors where women are massively unrepresented. So are you going to be able to staff that event? Well, I don't know, that's one issue that I have with it. But for me, the other issue, it says that we're putting women in a space and we have to protect them, rather than saying, okay, so why is this happening? What do we need to do to fix this problem and stop it from happening? And I think that has to be the bigger focus, rather than this one-off, let's do this, let's make this statement. You need to look at it, the bigger picture, and work out what it is that's going so wrong.
I agree. I think that it kind of falls into a conversation where it's like, oh, men, they just can't help themselves. We'll just put a fence around the women and then they'll be okay. Which is just not acceptable. It's about people learning behaviours and teaching people what to do, rather than making women protect themselves by isolating themselves. I also think that it becomes difficult when you include non-binary people and where the lines are drawn. And also, but I would say the crowdfunder for that event has raised £47,000. So I think if you ever feel like, oh, I don't think sexual harassment or sexual violence is an issue at music festivals and is something that women are worried about, then just that figure, that people were willing to put £47,000 like punters down for an all-female festival to avoid it, proves the point that it is a massive issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think that separating women off is not the answer, but it is something that comes up quite a lot. For anyone London-based, it's come up recently about women-only carriages. This whole idea, and I can see how it is attractive, because I would feel safer, and do always feel safer in women and girls only spaces, but it's not the answer, particularly because it can then feed into that idea of judgment and responsibility. So a woman goes to a festival and is raped and speaks out, and then it's like, well, you kind of knew that might happen because you went to a festival there would be men, why didn't you just go to the women-only festival? We already know that happens with these women-only carriages that exist in other countries. So I think it's a worrying move to make towards, but also understandable in today's climate where there are just huge levels of sexual harassment and sexual violence.
Yeah, I agree as well. I wouldn't want to go to a woman-only festival, and I think it's sad that some people do feel there's a need for it to exist. But as you pointed out, some people do feel vulnerable, and there are obviously some women out there who maybe would like to go to a festival who don't currently feel safe. So what can we do to focus to speak to those people and say, actually, if you can come, we will make more effort to make you feel safe.
So that would be speaking, obviously, to the women who are like, oh, I'm done, I can't be asked with, being groped all the time. I'm just going to go off and have a festival just with other women. But then, so you're speaking to them and saying, oh, come to our festival. But what are you saying to perps? What are you saying to the predominantly men and boys who are committing these acts? I think there's often conversations had with survivors, and we've seen that recently with the Me Too campaign. It's survivors who are speaking out, it's survivors who do that emotional labour, and it's, we all speak with survivors a lot, but there needs to be work done with men and boys and with perpetrators so that they know what is not okay and what is not allowed. And I think that's, again, a real need for a focus, just as you were saying about there being a list of inappropriate behaviours that will get you kicked out, like groping, upskirting, etc.
Yeah, also with that list, I think, it needs to be specific, because I think that you say to some people sexual violence, they immediately just think you're talking about rape and don't actually realise that groping someone is a sexually violent act too.
So how do you guys feel about female-only campsites then, and female-only spaces within festivals? Would they be helpful?
I'm going to say I'm anti them. For me, going to the festival, I go with my friends. And most of my friends are guys. I don't necessarily think female-only campsites are a way forward. I do think there's a case for saying, on occasion, there may be work that can be done to make someone feel safer. So Glastonbury this year, they were approached by someone who'd been sexually assaulted earlier this year, and they came to agreements with her and her friends that she came with as to how they could help her keep safe, because the perpetrator had been someone that she was supposed to be going to the festival with originally. And a lot of work was put into how they could make her feel safe. So if we're able to have those conversations, and festivals can say, okay, in these cases we might be able to come to more flexible agreements about where you can and can't go to feel safe. And things like that are a fantastic idea, but I'm personally not massively in favour of female-only campsites.
I know I just said about separating women being a bad idea, but I also do have to own the fact that I didn't go to a festival last year because I knew I'd be staying in a tent by myself, and I felt too unsafe to do that, because I think at festivals you just want to pretend that everyone's there just to have a great time, and the vast majority of people are, but also when you're sleeping in a tent and there's like a zip and this thin material separating you from fields of strangers, I think I totally agree with you, but I also know that I would be more comfortable sleeping in a female-only area.
See, I think I'm anti female-only campsites as well, because I probably don't think about it as much as I should. I go to loads of festivals by myself, and I get more caught up in the having fun and meeting new friends, and I don't really think about my safety as much as I should. And I just think...
Why should you have to think about
exactly,
it?
That's my point. I shouldn't have to think about my safety. You should just be able to go to a festival, camp wherever you want, do whatever you want, have a great time, not have to have that niggling feeling of, I should have camped, I shouldn't have gone by myself, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have camped in, amongst a group of lads. Guys should be taught to change their behaviour, we shouldn't have to change ours.
Also, a lot of people that I've spoken to who have been sexually assaulted, and one individual who was raped at a festival, it was by someone who they'd gone off with to they got off with to get a drink. They were making out, and maybe they were only 17, and they weren't really up for doing anything more than making out, and then it became a rape situation. And I think that like rape isn't just like some guy following someone in the dark. Like there's loads of different ways it plays out, and just separating people won't stop that from happening.
That's a really good point. And I also think it goes into perpetrator tactics. So perps are clever. They know there are certain things that they need to do not to get caught. They know to target the more vulnerable. Who, generally in festival environments, these will be people who have drunk a lot or taken drugs. And they know to try and, if they can, using charm, using friendliness, separate them from the gang. Try and get them to drink some more, give them some more drugs, and then try and persuade them and use those tactics of like constant persistence persuasion. So there are lots of ways to perpetrate sexual violence, and I think it's one of those rape myths that exists, that it's an unknown stranger seizing someone using additional violence, but it's not. It's much more the scenario which you just described. Absolutely.
With that being said, better lighting and phone signal everywhere are two practical changes you can make to make, as a woman at a festival, that's where I feel endangered, when I'm walking without a phone that functions in the dark, back maybe from my tent to the toilet, and it's quite a walk, and there's not really anyone else around. It's like 6 a.m, and maybe there's a random guy like just coming up.
It also doesn't cover the fact in some of the reports that we've had, and what happened to myself 2 years ago was that it wasn't back in the campsites, it was in the crowded areas in the field where the stages were. Because you're so, in those areas, particularly if it's a big crowd, you're so crowded in, and people can sometimes, or perpetrators might sometimes think that because it's dark, you're crowded in, that there is an anonymous thing they can do and they can get away with it. So female-only campsites aren't going to address that. So.
But you were saying before we started the panel that you did like the idea of the female-only venues, so like the Sisterhood at Glastonbury, for example, because that kind of represents something different. It's like females bonding and togetherness and like girl power, rather than locking the boys out because we're scared of them.
Yeah, I think that like I do genuinely really love women-only events, but like in that sense, in that it's like often feels fun. Like I live in London, and like Hampstead Ladies Pond feels like you're in a wonderful female-only utopia. But like it's not like, oh, now the men are gone, I can. No, it's not like, oh, now the men are gone, now I'm safe. It's a different feeling.
To me, it feels different because that's the celebration of being a woman, as opposed to I'm going to go in here and I'm going to sleep and I need to be protected because I'm at my most vulnerable. It's a very different feeling, and so I can kind of get on board with the female area of the site.
Two different things.
To do like craft activities, or just to make friends, have tea, drink, have cocktails, whatever. But as opposed to having a female-only campsite, it's a very different focus, I think.
Yeah, also, I guess, with the Glastonbury area, with lineups often being largely male-dominated, it is quite exciting to have spaces with like female acts on. And if that can't be the main stage for some reason, then a cordoned off area is also good.
Excellent. That's on the agenda for tomorrow's conference. We are starting to run out of time, so I will start to have to wrap up. So it's great that you all think that the campaign was a positive thing, and it was largely successful. We had 31 festivals back out their websites, 71 signed up to the Charter of Best Practice. Anyone can sign up to that at any time, by the way. It's not locked off now, but we do hope to see that number grow. But how should Safer Spaces move next? Like, what are the next steps that we should do for the campaign? We've spoken lots about what organisers should be doing. How should the Safer Spaces campaign move forward?
I think it would be good to have a place where we could get advice about things that we could be doing on festival sites. I mean, one thing that we've spoken about doing for next year is putting in kind of more campsite hubs, which serve lots of all sorts of purposes, which just as a kind of general information point up in the campsite, so they're not so separated from the arena where we've got more staff. And that, for example, could be a place that would be open for people to just go and sit and chill out late at night, or just somewhere that's not a security guard that people could know that they could go and approach. But again, it is resource, it is what sort of training would the staff need to go through, if any, and just sort of a little bit more, I suppose, ideas of what you can do to be proactive on site to provide a better service for people and to further spread that message, other than just kind of putting a poster in a toilet, which is essentially what we did this year, which was more than we'd done before. But I think we'd like to do more as well, because it is a difficult thing to talk about, and there isn't a lot of knowledge generally in society about how to deal with this. So we want to be a part of sort of learning how to do it.
I think the campsite hubs are a fantastic idea, actually. I was not doing the same thing stuff, but I was doing welfare stuff at another festival, and it was the first time they'd had a campsite, and they had a welfare tent up there, and it just became like a little hub. People would go in there if they were cold and sit and have a chat, have a cup of tea. So I think that's a fantastic idea, making it feel a little bit more like it's not just where you go to sleep.
Yeah.
Making it, sort of spreading down that festival feeling down to the campsites as well. I think we would love to see more of a continuation of this is proactive, this is fantastic, let's talk about this, okay, it's not a nice thing to talk about, rather than, as I keep saying, get to the end of festival season and go, oh shit, that happened, now let's deal with it. Keep pushing the proactive campaign, keep pushing the idea that festival is a community. We don't like to think that people would act like that in our community, so why is it acceptable when we go to a festival for a weekend and change our behaviour? So I would like to keep pushing that message as well.
Do we have time for questions? There's no...
Maybe a few minutes.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
I think an area that needs to be thought about amongst us is the whole leading by example. Ultimately, everyone in this room is responsible for an awful lot of people who are working the events, whether it's stewards, whether it's volunteers, whether it's crew. And we need to be very approachable with the customers who are there. And I know that we've all been in situations when you're really busy, you've got a million things to do, but ultimately you're the one in a high vis. And if someone comes and talks to you, whether they're just asking where the water point is or whether they're trying to report a sexual assault, it's very important that we make sure that we're all really, really approachable and that everyone who works with us is approachable. That's not a good question.
Can I, just building on that a bit, it's, I think, also an issue within our organisations, because we all employ a lot of people, we employ a lot of people in responsible positions, people in positions of power, normally over volunteers who may not have volunteered before at a festival. And so it isn't just your audience, it's also everyone that it kind of falls under our remit, and it's how we communicate to those people as well.
I think that was the example of where festival organisers need to start setting that message all year. Because if you know that you're going to go and spend 2 weeks setting up at a festival, then you know that that's what that festival stands for before you even get there. And that should carry on to the staff as well.
Any other questions?
I have a pretty long list, fine. We are talking a lot about females primarily, but we all know but we all know that rape is not just in terms of male raping a female, but there's you have non-binary genders, and transgender people get raped essentially as much as female, but there is bigger stigma for them to come out, because there's the thing that why would someone want to do that to you? So are you trying to pursue something like target people of other genders as well, not only females? Or do you just like, because when you were talking, you were primarily talking about females, so.
I think that it reflects what the situation is, though. Sexual violence is perpetrated by predominantly men, and it is perpetrated against predominantly women and girls, but absolutely we do not deny the fact that sexual violence can happen to anyone and can be perpetrated by anyone. So there are a small percentage of women who perpetrate sexual violence, and there are men who are victims of sexual violence, as well as non-binary people, transgender people as well. So we would never ever try and deny anyone's experience of sexual violence, and we believe that everyone deserves support for what they have experienced.
I think that's why we also, with the graphics that we put out around the campaign, we kept, I don't know if and many of you have seen it, but it was a stick figure animation and it was gender neutral. We didn't want to single out men, female, even though we know it is more of an issue with men versus female. But yeah, with regards to our campaign, we tried to keep it inclusive of everyone. One more question?
Do you think that perhaps it would be beneficial to have a specific team, even if it is a very small team, to deal with sexual violence at the festivals, or even a safe space where people know they can go to in case something happens, somewhere they can sit and talk with someone in a private area, or maybe a phone number they could call, or maybe have more female security officers and guards at the sites?
Festival for a long time have had a consent education tent that started, it was by, I think, a domestic violence group from the Isle of Wight started it, who worked with the local council, asked to have a spot there where they'd chat about consent in a friendly way to anyone who wanted to come and learn about it, and they found that as they ran that education programme, people actually came to that area to report incidents, both on site and incidents that had happened to them previously in their lives, because they found it a safe space where they could share their experiences. And so I think 2 years ago, the organisation built in a part to that area where, specifically for reporting, and had people trained people who they could report to, and they found that to work really well. And I think it's now at another festival, at Isle of Wight Festival as well. Yeah, Reclaim the Night.
I actually meant to say that earlier. When you improve a festival's response, when you improve the training, there will be an increase in disclosures. And for a lot of you, that's not going to be what you want, but it is what happens. And so actually, whenever we deliver training with anyone, we say it's a good thing that your disclosures are increasing, because it's happening anyway, but it means that people are speaking out and feel able to speak out. So I know it doesn't always square with where you're coming from, but it really is a positive sign, because it shows that you're doing it right.
And if you think about it as, in a sense, that if most organisations have an equalities officer and health and safety officer and other types of officers, yes, we'd love to see all security and all staff taking the message forward, but if you had one member of your key team that is specially trained to deal with it, so if something does happen, that person could be the key person to be dispatched to wherever that person is receiving attention, medical attention, and take over from that point to say, okay, this is what the festival needs to do, this is what the medical services need to do, and things like that. So all it could take is one or two people, obviously depends on the size of your festival, because every organisation has to have an officer for, equality and things like that anyway. Why not extend it to just one more person?
That's also part of the reason why we put the rape crisis workshop on tomorrow. So ideally, I'd like to see all of the AIF members and anyone who signed up to the charter. I'd like at least one team member on each of those festivals to have had that training. By next summer might be unrealistic, but in the next 2 years, definitely. Thanks to our panelists, please.